all focused on the year 2012 with these redundancies. It's going to be a time of great trial. It's going to be a time at the end of the procession of the equinox. It's going to be coupled with these return of these dragons, or a dragon in the air, a dragon that has the power of flight. It's going to give birth to a messianic figure upon the earth, who we might think of as the Antichrist. And of course, with Petrus Romanus, it's going to also perhaps provide the book of Revelation's false prophet. But then, following all this chaos and tribulation, there is going to be the emergence of a new form of humanity upon the earth, and all of the government documents revolving around transhumanism are also targeting 2012, saying after that date, all bets are off. The human enhancement revolution is going to begin. So as I was looking at all of this and thinking, that all of this prophecy had been developing, over thousands of years, focused on this one time frame, 2012, where was this coming from? And the thing you have to keep in mind is that spirits, influences, sometimes know things about what we would call dispensations. If you look in the Bible, for instance, Jesus goes into the valley of the Gadarenes, and the wild men come running up out of the cave, but they say to him, "Why have you come hither to torment us before the time?" And this is the Greek word, I think it's kairos, I can't quite remember, but it definitely means a specific moment in time. And they knew that that time had not yet arrived. What does this tell us? It tells us that supernaturalism knows something about fixed epochs. And I started wondering if that's the spirit that was operating behind all of these ancient occult orders and even more modern occult orders, and their fixation around the year 2012, that they either believe that it is a specific dispensational advent in which something's going to occur, or it's a kind of great deception. They're motivating these occult forces to use that period in time when the world basically has been brought to its knees through economic and other kinds of chaos, in order to introduce their own occult kind of elitism, their order, right?
That's right.
And so I kind of go back and forth in my mind about, where is this motivation coming from? All right, you asked me about the Great Seal, and I want to follow up just on the new Pope just for a moment, and then because the idea of the fulfillment of Malachi Martin's prophecy is actually very connected to the prophecies upon the Great Seal of the United States, and so we might kind of bounce back and forth between these two ideas for a moment.
Sure.
You had mentioned that Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, might be symbolic of the pontificate. In other words, that the final pope might have a Christian name variation that satisfies the meaning, that he might not actually be called Peter the Roman. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because the man who in 2002 correctly predicted that the Pope succeeding John Paul II would be named Benedict XVI is a man by the name of Ronald L. Conte Jr. Now, if you look him up on the internet, you'll find that he's talking about this Petrus Romanus II, and he believes that this Pope is simply going to reaffirm actually, I think he says he's going to take the name Pius the 13th.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so that Peter the Roman basically means this Pope is going to reaffirm the authority of the Roman pontiff over the church. It's an authority that's based on their belief about the place of the Pope as a successor of Peter. And that this Pope's going to emphasize the supremacy of the Roman Catholic faith and the Roman Catholic Church above all other religions and denominations, and its authority over all Christians and all peoples all over the world. So maybe kind of a little bit of a pre-Vatican II kind of approach, a very conservative Catholic approach. And he says that it's during the reign of this Pope, Peter the Roman, also known as Pius the 13th, that the great apostasy is going to begin, and then that Pope will mark the first part of the Great Tribulation during this generation. So that's kind of his interpretation around that. But the idea by Catholics like this, that the final Pope on St. Malachi's list actually heralds the beginning of great apostasy followed by great tribulation, and that this very next pope will set the stage for the imminent unfolding of apocalyptic events, is something that, of course, a lot of non-Catholics would agree with that. But our interpretation of it would be that it's going to give rise to the false prophet, who, according to the book of Revelation, is going to lead the world's religious communities into embracing a political figure known as the Antichrist. And this is what ties to the Great Seal of the United States, because the Great Seal of the United States is talking more about the political figure, and I think a lot of people would agree that the Antichrist, the political figure, could potentially come from the United States. But there will be, according to prophecy, there's going to be a marriage of church and secular government. So this makes the prophecy of the popes interesting, because this could give rise to the false prophet. Now, I said all that to say this. In recent history, there have been numerous Catholic priests, and some of them are dead now, that have been surprisingly outspoken on what they have seen as the inevitable danger of the false prophet rising from within the ranks of Catholicism as a result of what they called a secret satanic Illuminati Masonic superforce. So you had Catholic priests like Father John F. O'Connor, who's dead now, Father Alfred Coons, who's dead and whose death we are investigating right now, Father Malachi Martin, among others, who imagined that this secret society that is connected to America is going to be used to introduce this false Catholic. I'm trying to remember what the term was that Malachi Martin used concerning the final conclave concerning him. But they believed that this would happen because obviously the Roman Catholic Church, it represents something like 1/6 of the world's population, over half of all Christians, and so it would be indispensable for controlling future global elements in matters of church and state. And in addition to that, of course, if you look at the Vatican, it is its own state. It's got ambassadors to all these countries. So as an arm of a political world leader and Antichrist, the Vatican is going to be indispensable. And in fact, don't forget that it was John Paul I who was elected Pope in 1978, remember, and died after only 33 days in office.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Poisoned.
That's right. His death, it's actually been the subject of controversy and been tied to some of the evidence that he may have been actually murdered, poisoned. But why? According to everything we know, is to keep him from revealing information about Masonic cardinals, as well as an investigation that he actually had launched into the Vatican Bank.
That's right. And we have this whole interesting unfoldment, as you know, Tom, afterwards, happening with Roberto Calvi, the Vatican's banker, and the ritualistic way that he was found hanging under the Blackfriars Bridge. We talked about this before in the program. It's a really interesting epoch, if you will, right here. And it seems to me, anyway, that it's at this stage, potentially then, that the Vatican also is being hijacked, co-opted. We might have an infiltration of sorts of the Vatican at this point. What do you think?
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. These were actually Catholic priests, and some of them highly qualified, members of the Pontifical Academy. I mean, these were not low-level priests who believed that the Vatican, in fact, was being infiltrated. They also pointed to Roberto Calvi. He was the chairman of the Ambrosiano or whatever it's called bank, the Vatican
like
Bank, and a shareholder. And in '78, it was discovered that monies actually had been being illegally laundered through that bank, and Calvi, he fled Italy, but 3 days later, something like that, or 4 days, whatever it was, his secretary conveniently committed suicide. And then not much longer after that, Calvi was found hanging under that bridge in London that you just mentioned. But his death, if you do the research in it, his death was reported to have been at the hand of the Freemasons. And so what these various Catholic priests like Coons, O'Connor, Malachi Martin, others were talking about is how the Vatican had been infiltrated by Luciferians, Satanists among the among the Catholic elite, and we know that it is a fact that shortly after becoming Pope, John Paul I became aware of people, including cardinals, bishops, high-ranking prelates, that he said were Freemasons, which would be against, the rules of Catholicism.
Right.
And within days of that disclosure, that Russian Orthodox Patriarch Nicodemus, he died suddenly of a heart attack after he drank a cup of coffee during an audience with John Paul. And some investigators thought that cup of poisoned coffee had been meant for John Paul I, and that it was accidentally served to the wrong person. Then, of course,
because he got this later. He got this later.
Right. He reigned as Pope for 33 days. And by the way, 33, talk about a Freemasonic marker.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. Ritualistic, symbolic. Oh, yeah. You bet.
Yeah. Well, by the way, people listening to this conversation, there's a 2-hour-long presentation, and as far as I know, it's still up at YouTube, but I also know it's available on DVD, where Father John O'Connor gives a homily titled The Reign of the Antichrist, in which he describes these changes within the institution and how that it was already at work before his death in the Vatican to provide for the coming of the Antichrist. This is a respected Catholic priest, and in that sermon and elsewhere, O'Connor actually outlined the catalyst for the scheme unfolding as a result of what he called Masonic conspirators within the Vatican, whose plan he called Alta Vendetta, would essentially take control of the papacy and help the false prophet deceive the world's faithful, including Catholics, into worshiping the Antichrist. Well, so there was O'Connor, I started to say our mutual friend. I'm not sure that you knew Malachi Martin.
No, I didn't, but I know of him, though. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, he was a personal friend of Pope Paul VI. He worked within the Holy See, did research on the Dead Sea Scrolls. He published articles in journals on Semitic paleography. He taught Aramaic, Hebrew, sacred scripture, and he was way up there. But in '65, John Paul granted him a dispensation from his Jesuit and priestly duties, and that's when he moved to New York. And he dedicated himself to writing about, and sometimes speaking out on, a whole variety of issues stemming from the Second Vatican Council, Vatican II, in which he thought that was a marker, that was a date in which the conspirators had started establishing their authority within the church and was turning the church away from orthodoxy as the Catholics perceive it. Well, anyway, he started writing about all that stuff. He became a real maverick, if you will. And a lot of people in Catholicism didn't like him anymore. A lot of the priests didn't like him anymore, but he was a close personal friend of John Paul. But he was a member of the Vatican Advisory Council. He was the personal secretary to renowned Jesuit Cardinal Augustine B. He had privileged information pertaining to a lot of different secretive church and world issues, including the third secret of Fatima, and potentially a fourth secret of Fatima that's never been published. So I'm saying all that to establish his credibility, and then here he was in New York spelling out parts of a plan to formally install the false prophet within the Vatican Church during what he called a final conclave. And he tied it to an Illuminati Masonic group that was made up of Western plutocrats that he called the Assembly or the Superforce, and discussed how they had infiltrated the highest levels of Vatican administration and were working to bring about a new world order.
Yeah.
Well, some people believe that might have led to his suspicious death in 1999. Martin, on his deathbed, I forget who the priest was, but he told one of his personal confidants that his feet had actually been pulled out from under him. And then, of course, he fell down and became comatose, and eventually he died. And this all just